My name is Sloan Elridge. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've worked behind restricted doors, inside classified supply chains, and encrypted flight plans. I don't do fairy tales. I do logistics, risk assessment, chain of custody. I don't forget to sign forms, and I certainly don't forget to clear wedding deliveries. Which is why the white box on the side table wasn't just suspicious, it was impossible. We'd just finished exchanging vows under the open-air canopy at Fort Havenfield, a military outpost that doesn't allow unexpected anything. My husband Leonis stood beside me in full Navy dress blues, every medal earned not inherited. And when I reached out half-thinking the box had just been misplaced by a caterer, he caught my wrist mid-air. "Don't touch it!" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The steel in his tone said everything. I looked at him. He wasn't looking at the box. He was looking at my sister. Gemma stood at the makeshift bar, swirling a champagne flute, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't a gift, it was a threat, and she'd wrapped it in white. No one else seemed to notice it yet. The champagne was flowing, someone had started a soft rendition of "At Last" on the cello, and the sunlight filtering through the string lights made everything look like a curated dream. But my wrist still tingled from the pressure of Leonis's grip, and my eyes stayed locked on the box. It wasn't there 10 minutes ago. I'd passed that table myself on the way to greet Colonel Beckett. It had been empty then. Now it sat like it had always belonged, medium-sized, perfectly square, wrapped in matte white paper, with no bow, no tape seams, no handwriting except 3 words printed in careful script, 4S. No last name. No initials. Just the kind of note meant to seem intimate. I scanned the room, my jaw set. No one was looking at it. But Lenise was still watching Gemma, and when I turned back to her, she tilted her head and raised her glass slightly like it was a toast. I stepped back, the air around me, thinning. My fingers itched to reach for my phone to rewind every conversation from the past year. But Leonis didn't move. He gave a short nod to someone near the edge of the tent. 2 men in formal Navy dress rose in unison, quiet and calm. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. Gemma's smile twitched. That was when I knew for sure she hadn't expected the box to be caught. Not this early. Not in front of a room filled with high-ranking officers and their +1s. Not on the day she assumed I'd be too distracted, too softened, too much a bride to stay on guard. The box hadn't come to celebrate. It had come to stage something. Leonis leaned toward me, his voice low and even. "Evans and Colt will secure it. Stay here. Let them work." I nodded once, still watching Gemma. She turned then. Disappeared into the far end of the tent, slipping behind the hanging white drapes, like a guest headed for the restroom. No one stopped her. No one noticed. That was the moment I realized she hadn't come to be part of this wedding. She'd come to interrupt it. Evans lifted the box with careful hands, scanning it first, with a portable detector pulled from a side holster. Nothing beeped, but his face didn't relax. He walked it toward the side office administrative space adjacent to the chapel without a word. Everything felt too quiet. A few people glanced around, sensing something off, but no one asked. Not when Leonis stood at my side, calm and unreadable. His hand brushed mine again. Not tender, not ceremonial, just steady. I didn't speak, but inside the calculations had already started. And Gemma had just triggered something far more dangerous than a ruined wedding. By the time the cake was served, Gemma was gone. No goodbye, no note, not even a lipstick smudge on a champagne glass. Just absence, neat and surgical, exactly her style when she wanted to disappear before fallout. I stood near the edge of the tent, watching the admin office door close behind Evans. The box was out of sight now, under lock and surveillance. But the real danger wasn't what was inside. It was the timing. The way she had waited until the moment when I was surrounded, softened by vows and music, and people I couldn't afford to alarm. It wasn't just audacity, it was strategy. And that meant she hadn't acted alone. Lenise rejoined me, quiet as always. His presence didn't comfort me, it grounded me. His hand brushed my lower back like a command more than affection. She knew exactly when to strike, he said low enough for only me to hear. I nodded. I think this is her plan B. He didn't ask what plan A had been. He didn't need to. 4 months ago, Gemma had called in the middle of the night, sobbing her voice thick with guilt, or theater I still couldn't tell. She claimed she needed to send me a few documents just to hold on to. Something about a legal dispute, a landlord a favor. I said no. She cried harder, said she'd always looked up to me, said she wouldn't ask if she had another option. Still, I said no. That call had haunted me, not because I felt guilty, but because it didn't feel finished. Now I understood why. She assumed, I said slowly, that I wouldn't risk ruining my own wedding. Leonise exhaled through his nose, sharp and short. She counted on your restraint. And she was right. If he hadn't caught my wrist, I would have opened the damn thing. Right there in front of friends, commanding officers, photographers. That wasn't just risky. It would have made me complicit. I stared at the flap of the tent where she had vanished. She knew me well enough to predict my silence. What she didn't count on was what silence looks like when it's holding a blade. The wedding ended early. No big announcement. Just a quiet shift in energy that moved through the guests like a subtle weather front. People finished their drinks faster, gave polite hugs, whispered something about early flights. They knew not to ask questions when the room went cold. Back home, I changed out of my dress without ceremony. The silk pooled at my feet like something left behind. I pulled on plain black pants, a crewneck shirt, and tied my hair back. Not as a statement, just muscle memory. I wasn't done being a bride. I was reverting back into someone sharper. Leonise sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, but untouched. She's been testing your edges for years, he said. I nodded, walking past him to the filing drawer we kept locked, even though no one else lived here. I pulled out my backup drive and plugged it in. Dozens of folders, loaded messages, PDFs, tax returns, years of digital dust I'd kept, but never questioned. I opened a thread with Gemma from last winter. At the time, it had felt harmless. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. Might send you a little something soon. Don't worry, nothing serious. Trust me. Love you. I hadn't answered. Now I saw it for what it was, a breadcrumb. Not affection, not apology. Setup. I kept scrolling. Tiny requests. Can I use your address for a job app? Can I forward you something just for safekeeping? Do you still have your lease file from Georgia? She hadn't stolen anything in one sweep. She had built a blueprint. Leonise walked over, leaned against the wall. She's not careless, he said. She's deliberate. She knows you think guilt is love. I looked up. That was the sentence that cracked something open. She didn't need me to agree. She just needed me not to say no fast enough. And I hadn't. Not every time. I opened a folder labeled W-2, 2021, and there it was, my full tax return sent to her in a moment of familial weakness. She said it was to compare deductions. Said it would help her sort her finances. It had helped all right. She'd used it to build a shadow version of me, and I'd handed her the first brick. By morning, I was waiting outside the NCIS field office with a file under my arm and a silence coiled in my chest like a weapon not yet drawn. Special Agent Marin met me at the door. She didn't smile, just nodded once and led me into a room with gray walls and no windows. A table, 2 chairs, no distractions. She slid a manila folder across to me. We scanned the USB from the box. I opened it. The top page hit like a slow drop of acid. 3 invoices, each with my name, each bearing a signature so close to mine it felt like a ghost had written it. Almost perfect until you knew what to look for. No pressure tremor, no ink drag, lifted, placed, forged. Then a contract dated 2 weeks ago. Elridge and Carbons Holdings, a shell company created using my military ID, partial SSN, and a Georgia address I hadn't used in 5 years. Marin didn't blink. This was a delivery confirmation. That box at your wedding, it wasn't a gift. It was the final leg in a laundering chain. My stomach turned, but I kept my voice steady. Do we know who built it? We're still tracing logins, but based on the metadata, It originated from a personal device registered under a Gemma Elridge. IP matches a residence in Brooklyn. Of course. Leonis had been silent until now, standing behind me, arms crossed. They didn't need your permission, he said quietly. Just your pattern. I turned toward him. He was right. They'd studied how I forgave, how I hesitated, how I hated conflict just enough to delay action, and delay in their world was all the permission they needed. Marin leaned forward. Lieutenant, we need your statement. If you're ready, we'll begin formal proceedings for identity fraud and conspiracy. I placed both hands flat on the table. I'm ready, and I was. Because they hadn't just used my name, they'd weaponized my silence, and now I was done whispering. The room was colder than it needed to be. Maybe that was on purpose. Gemma sat across the table, one leg crossed over the other, perfectly composed. Hair-curled blouse tucked a light layer of makeup applied with the precision of someone still clinging to the illusion of control. But the circles under her eyes told another story. I didn't wear my uniform, just a plain white shirt and black slacks, simple, unassuming. Still military, just not their kind. She looked up as I entered. Sloan, she said, like we were meeting for coffee. I didn't answer. I sat. The silence stretched long enough for discomfort to settle in her posture. Then she broke first. You always had the spine, she said, voice softer than I expected. I thought you'd understand. Understand what I asked, tone even. That you used my military ID to funnel money through shell corporations, that you waited until my wedding to make a drop in front of my chain of command. She looked away. The act cracked. Her mascara wasn't waterproof. I didn't think they'd trace it back to you. I leaned forward, voice low. That's the problem, Gemma. You didn't think they'd trace it. Not that it was wrong. She swallowed hard. It was supposed to be one shipment. Will said. I stopped her with a glance. Don't bring him into this. You were the one at the warehouse. You signed the manifests. She didn't deny it. Then came the question I knew was coming. Can you fix it? I exhaled slowly. You want me to tell them you had my permission? She said nothing. She didn't need to. I shook my head. I can't. Because the moment I fix this for you, I become the thing you counted on, someone who protects the family, no matter how wrong they are. She blinked finally, letting a tear fall. You don't understand, she whispered. Will's flipping. He's blaming me for everything. I nodded once. Then maybe it's time you stop playing the victim in your own con. The agent behind the glass tapped once, signal that our time was up. I stood. Gemma looked up again, pleading now. Please, don't hate me. I paused at the door. I don't hate you, I said. I just don't trust you. And that's worse. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No pounding gavels, no shouting lawyers, just beige walls, muted carpet, and a judge with a voice like old paper, measured, deliberate. Gemma sat to my left, not in handcuffs, not in orange, just a navy suit and folded hands. She had accepted a plea deal, 1 count of wire fraud, 1 of identity theft, and 2 of conspiracy. No jail time, just probation, restitution, and a permanent stain on her record that no PR firm could bleach. She never looked at me. When the judge finalized the terms, his tone remained even. He thanked her for cooperation. A marshal handed her a paper. She signed it like someone surrendering a passport. Then they called Will. He arrived late, flanked by 2 marshals. Still smug, still overconfident, still convinced charm was a currency that hadn't collapsed. But the prosecutors didn't need him anymore. Gemma's confession had already mapped out the network. He pled not guilty. The courtroom didn't flinch. The evidence was clean: IP logs, financial trails, warehouse footage, a recorded call where he laughed and said, "She won't even notice." Sloan's too busy saving the world. The judge wasn't amused. 18 months in a federal facility. Full restitution, case closed. Outside, I signed a document confirming my name had been cleared from all internal surveillance. No apology. No medal. Just a simple signature line below mine. Leonie stood beside me in the hallway. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't need to. I traced my name on the form with my finger. Not out of vanity, out of recognition. They'd tried to erase me behind my own signature, but I was still here. And now the system knew it too. A week after the sentencing, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a message. A real letter, heavy envelope cream stationery handwriting I recognized immediately. My mother's. I opened it in the kitchen, the same space where the box had once sat like a loaded question. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and burnt espresso. The house was quiet. Inside, just a single page. We didn't know, but we let it happen. We saw the patterns, the favors, the way your name kept coming up in things that didn't feel right. And we chose not to ask questions. Because asking would have meant admitting we'd raised this. We thought love was believing the best in your sister. We see now we should have believed you. I don't expect forgiveness. But if it ever comes, we'll understand. No signature, just Mom. I read it once. Then again. And then I folded it carefully, placed it beside the coffee machine, and didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because for the first time, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Later that afternoon, while reorganizing the spice cabinet, I found something tucked behind a loose panel. A card. Simple, cream-colored, looping script, for S. My chest tightened, but my hands were steady. I turned on the oven, slid the broiler tray out, laid the card flat inside. The flame didn't roar. It curled. Quiet, clean, like something that never belonged here to begin with. Lenice walked in a few minutes later, catching the faint trace of smoke. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. I wiped my hands on a towel, looked up, and said what I finally meant. "Not okay, just clear." He nodded, walked to me and kissed the side of my head. Clear is good, and it was. Because clarity doesn't erase betrayal, but it gives you back the map. 3 weeks later, the email came. No ceremony, no apology, just a cold header personnel status update. I opened it while sipping lukewarm coffee at the kitchen counter, expecting nothing. But there it was, 3 plain words that slid back into my life like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. Status active consideration. Not cleared, not commended. Just considered again. And somehow that was enough. I printed the page, held it up to the light, then folded it and slipped it into the file I kept in my nightstand, the one labeled Private Lieutenant Sloan Elridge. It had traveled with me through postings, inspections, reviews. It held every page that proved I'd built a life with discipline, with integrity, with work no one ever saw. Now it held the line they tried to erase and failed. That afternoon, I laced up my running shoes and hit the base gym. 5 miles, no music, just my own breath and the cadence of reclaiming routine. Not for fitness, for rhythm. I showered, changed into uniform, and walked to the admin office. The sergeant behind the desk stood a little straighter as I handed him the printout. He didn't ask questions, he just typed in the code. I turned to leave and paused by the bulletin board. 2nd row, middle slot. My photo was still there. Sharp eyes, straight spine. A name they almost rewrote. One corner had started to curl. I pressed it flat. Not for vanity. Just to remind myself it was still mine. That night, Leonis grilled dinner out back, and we ate on the patio. The light was soft, the kind that makes silence feel earned. I pulled out my journal and wrote in longhand. They used my name because they thought it was quiet, because they assumed I wouldn't fight, because silence to them looked like permission. But it wasn't. It was restraint. And restraint is not surrender. Lenice came inside carrying the dishes. "You're writing again," he said. I nodded. "Feels right." He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and sat across from me. "You ready to move on?" I didn't answer right away. Just looked up at the stars. Real ones. Not the kind they projected onto me. "Not moving on," I said. "Moving forward." He raised his glass. To forward. We drank without clinking. No toast, just wait. Because this wasn't the kind of victory that required a banner. It was the kind that restored a name. The kind that let you sleep with your jaw unclenched. The kind that didn't demand noise. Just correction, and that was enough.